The morning of the divorce, Ethan Carter ironed his own shirt, not because he had to. Not because he was trying to impress anyone. He ironed it because Lily had asked him to look nice. And Lily's requests were the only ones he had honored without question for the past 3 years. He stood in the kitchen of their apartment, the smaller one, the one he had moved into after Vanessa took the house, pressing the iron slowly across the pale blue fabric. The apartment smelled like coffee and maple syrup. Lily was at the table behind him, swinging her legs and eating her toast in deliberate, tiny bites the way she always did when something made her nervous. "Daddy," she said. Is today going to be sad?" Ethan set the iron down. He turned around and looked at his daughter, 7 years old, hair still tangled from sleep, her pajama top peeking out beneath the collar of her school sweater because she had dressed herself in the wrong order again. "Today," he said carefully, "is just a Thursday." She considered this. Then she took another bite of toast. Okay. He didn't lie to her. He never lied to her. He had simply learned, over years of parenthood, that there were truths you could offer immediately, and truths that required time to become bearable. Today was not a sad day. Today was a day of paperwork. The sadness had already happened in hotel hallways, in quiet kitchens at midnight, in waiting rooms where he had sat with a sleeping child against his chest, and learned that some silences never fill back up. They drove to school first. That was non-negotiable. Lily's recital practice was at 9 o'clock, and she had a solo 3 lines of a song about a sparrow that she had been rehearsing for 2 weeks. Ethan sat through the carpool line behind a silver minivan and listened to her hum it softly from the back seat. He recognized the tune now without trying. It had become part of him the way all of Lily's small habits had braided into his days so thoroughly that he could no longer identify the version of himself that had existed before she was born. He walked her to the classroom door. She hugged him around the middle, her face pressed into his ribs. And then she looked up. "Will you be there after?" "Always." She disappeared inside. Ethan stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary. The other parents flowed around him, mothers in workout clothes, fathers checking their phones, a grandmother with a pink umbrella. No one looked at him twice. He was unremarkable in this context. Medium height, quiet eyes, plain coat. A man waiting to leave. A man who belonged, in the public imagination, to no particular category of significance. He had noticed, over the years, the way invisibility worked in communities like this one. The school hallway had its own social architecture, its own unspoken hierarchy of who greeted whom and with what degree of warmth. The parents who drove new cars and wore branded athletic gear moved through it with a certain ease acknowledged. Included, their names remembered by the administrative staff at the front desk. The parents who were messier, louder, more visibly striving, occupied a middle register. And then there were the quiet ones. The ones who came and went without ceremony. Who were polite and on time, and entirely easy to overlook. He had spent 6 years being that man. Deliberately, mostly. He found it restful. There had been a time longer ago now than felt possible when Ethan Carter had not been unremarkable. He had been 28, sleep-deprived in a different way, working 18-hour days in a glass building outside Portland with 3 other engineers who believed that private aviation was fundamentally broken and that they were the ones to fix it. He had co-founded the company with a college friend, a systems architect named Preston Wolfe, on the premise that charter flight logistics were still operating with 1990s software and that the right platform could cut costs by 40% while doubling reliability. They had been right, but Ethan had not been there to see it all the way through. Lily was born in March of her first year. She was small and loud and perfect. And for 3 months, everything was fine. Then came the diagnosis, a rare autoimmune condition that the doctors explained in long, careful sentences, while Ethan sat across from them in a plastic chair holding his wife's hand and understanding, with cold clarity, that his daughter's body had turned against itself. The next 2 years were a blur of hospitals and medication adjustments, and a particular kind of exhaustion that has no name. Vanessa returned to work after 8 months, because she couldn't stand the stillness, she said. She needed purpose, she said. The career she had built was important, she said. And Ethan, who had always been better at night shifts, better at the quiet vigils, better at reading the same picture book 14 times without losing his mind, stayed home. He had called Preston from a hospital cafeteria on a Wednesday night in October. "I need to step back," he said. A long pause. Then, "How far back?" "Far." Preston had said he understood. Ethan had believed him. They had restructured, quietly, with no announcement and no drama. Ethan kept his stake. Preston had insisted and removed himself from operations entirely. He had not been in the building in 4 years. The restructuring had taken 3 weeks and had involved lawyers and accountants and a quiet board meeting where Ethan had appeared in person for the last time in that period, shaken hands, and left. The other board members, venture partners and early angels, who had believed in the platform before it proved itself, had watched him go with expressions ranging from genuine regret to careful calculation. One of them, a brisk woman named Caroline Reyes, who had led the Series A, had followed him to the elevator. "This doesn't have to be permanent," she said. "I know. The door is open." "I know, Caroline. Thank you." He had not been sentimental about it. Sentimentality was a luxury of people with time to look backward, and he was going home to a daughter who needed him to be entirely forward-facing. He drove back to the hospital from the airport. He had flown into Portland that morning and was flying back that same afternoon, and arrived in time to relieve the nurse who had been sitting with Lily during his absence, and to read her the book about the bear who could not find his hat, which was her preferred story in that period, and which Ethan had memorized so thoroughly that he could recite it in the dark without error. Lily had fallen asleep with her hand in his. He had stayed until the small hours. He had not missed the company once that night. Vanessa had known about the company. In the same vague way, you know about a friend's cousin's business, the name, the general concept. The sense that it had something to do with planes. She had never asked about the details. She had been focused, always, on her own trajectory. Regional marketing director, then VP, then the ambitions above that, she spoke about at dinner with the specificity of someone reading from a 5-year plan. She did not ask about Ethan's 5-year plan. She stopped asking about Ethan at all, more or less, somewhere around the 2nd year of Lily's illness. Ethan noticed it the way you notice the temperature dropping gradually. Then, with sudden certainty, the conversations shortened. The evenings became separate. She started referring to his work around the house as helping out, which was not a phrase that suggested partnership. By the time Lily turned 5 and her condition had stabilized enough for preschool, the marriage was a form more than a fact. He had not fought the divorce. He would fight for Lily. That was the only thing that mattered. He drove to the courthouse alone. The room was smaller than he expected. Ethan had imagined something from a film: dark wood, imposing gallery. A judge with the face of permanent disapproval. What he found instead was a modest civil courtroom, with fluorescent lighting and chairs that had been worn down by years of difficult afternoons. The kind of room where ordinary human ruin was processed with administrative efficiency. Vanessa was already there. She had brought 2 people with her: her attorney, a sharp-voiced woman named Diana Marsh, who wore her competence like armor, and a friend, Rachel Holt, who worked with Vanessa at the firm and had spent the past several months collecting testimony about Ethan's various inadequacies. Ethan had brought himself. He had an attorney on record, a careful, quiet man named Thomas Aldridge, who had reviewed all the documents and advised Ethan, with gentle but clear emphasis, that he was entitled to significantly more than he was claiming. Ethan had listened patiently. Then he had told Thomas what he wanted: primary custody of Lily, no support payments in either direction, and no claim on the house or the shared accounts. Thomas had looked at him for a long moment. "You understand that given your circumstances—" "I understand everything," Ethan had said. "This is what I want." The proceeding moved quickly. Diana Marsh presented Vanessa's case with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Here was the marital home. Here were the shared assets. Here was the understanding that Vanessa's career had been the primary income, and therefore her claim to the larger share was reasonable. She mentioned, with the delicate contempt of someone who had rehearsed it, that Ethan had been out of professional employment for 6 years and had no current income to speak of. There was quiet laughter from somewhere behind him. Rachel Holt, probably. He did not turn around. He signed where Thomas indicated. He did not contest the house. He did not contest the vehicle. He did not contest the savings account, which had been almost entirely funded by Vanessa's salary, and which Ethan had never touched except for medical bills, most of which he had paid through other means that no one in this room had thought to ask about. Vanessa watched him sign with an expression he recognized. The one she wore when she was waiting for something to happen, and it did not. Like she had been braced for an argument, and his cooperation felt, somehow, like a defeat she had not earned. She leaned toward Diana and said something quiet. Diana smiled. The custody arrangement was confirmed. Primary residence with Ethan. Generous visitation for Vanessa. School decisions shared. The judge spoke the final words in the flat register of a man who has spoken them thousands of times. And then, it was over. Ethan stood. Vanessa stood. She looked at him across the narrow space. For a moment, just a moment. Something shifted in her face. Something that was not quite triumph, and not quite satisfaction. Something with an edge to it that he didn't analyze because he had stopped trying to decode her expressions 2 years ago. "I hope you figure out what you're going to do," she said. "For Lily's sake." He said nothing. Rachel Holt, from somewhere behind. Poor guy. She really married beneath herself. More quiet laughter. The sort that doesn't bother hiding. Thomas Aldridge touched Ethan's elbow. "Ready?" "Yes," Ethan said. They walked out into the corridor. Ethan's phone buzzed, once, twice, 3 times messages from his assistant, from Preston, from a board member, whose name he recognized from the last quarterly report. He silenced the phone and put it in his coat pocket. Outside, the autumn sky was the particular blue that only comes in October, sharp and clean and indifferent. He looked at it for a moment. Then he called the school to confirm pickup. There was a voicemail from Preston that Ethan had been meaning to return for 3 days. He listened to it now, sitting in his car in the courthouse parking structure, one hand on the steering wheel and the window cracked. "Ethan, it's me. I know you've got a lot happening this week, but we need to discuss the Cascadia acquisition. The board wants your input before the vote. And I've been telling them for 6 months that your vote matters, so it really does need to be you. Also, the new Gulfstream is certified and ready. Marcus says she runs beautifully. The crew is standing by whenever you want to take her out. Call me back." He called back. Preston answered on the second ring, which was unusual. Preston was usually in 3 meetings simultaneously before noon. "How'd it go?" "It's done." "Good done?" "Or just done?" "Just done." "The way most things are done." Preston was quiet for a moment. He had known Ethan since they were both 22, working out of a shared office space that charged them $400 a month for a room that smelled like other people's sandwiches. He knew when to push and when not to. "The jet is at Jefferson," he said. "Marcus can have it ready in 2 hours. I have to pick up Lily at 3. "I know. I was thinking more tomorrow? Take her somewhere. She might like it." Ethan looked at the parking structure wall. Concrete, a water stain in the shape of nothing in particular. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe." He stayed in the car for a few minutes after they hung up. He was not given to self-pity. It was a luxury he had not been able to afford during the years when Lily was sick, and like many luxuries, he had simply stopped wanting it. But he allowed himself, in that parking structure, 2 quiet minutes to feel whatever needed to be felt. What needed to be felt was this: the recognition that he had spent 6 years becoming invisible on purpose, and that Vanessa's contempt, which had once cut him, now simply confirmed what he already understood about the choice he had made. He had stepped back from a company that had become, in his absence, something extraordinary. He had done it without resentment and without announcement, because Lily had needed someone present, and he was the one who knew how to be present. He had sold one watch, then another, then a third, not because he needed the money, but because he had not wanted to touch the company accounts while Preston was managing growth capital, and pride had made him stubborn about that in the early years. He had given up a seat at the table where decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars were being made, and he had traded it for a smaller table where a 7-year-old ate toast and swung her legs. He did not regret it. He regretted almost nothing about his daughter. The company now operated a fleet of 41 aircraft across the western United States, and was in final negotiations to acquire a regional carrier in Canada. The valuation from the last private round 18 months ago, before the Cascadia discussions began, had placed Ethan's stake at $147 million. No one in that courtroom had known. No one who laughed had known. He had not corrected them. He did not need to. He picked up Lily at 3 o'clock. She ran out to him with her backpack slapping against her shoulders and her face alight with the particular joy of a child who has rehearsed something and knows she did it well. "I didn't mess up the sparrow part," she announced. "I knew you wouldn't." Mrs. Ellison said my voice carried. "That's because you project from your diaphragm." "What's a diaphragm?" "A muscle that makes your voice loud." "Oh." She took his hand. "Can we get hot chocolate?" "We can." They walked to the car. Lily talked about the rehearsal, who had forgotten their lyrics, who had tripped on the stage step, whether the gold star ribbon on her costume was real gold. Ethan listened the way he always listened. Completely. Without the half-attention of someone waiting for a turn to speak. He had parked in the lot adjacent to the small regional airfield that served the downtown area. This was unusual. He had taken a different route from the courthouse, thinking vaguely that they might stop for the hot chocolate near the airfield cafe, which Lily loved because it had a window that looked out over the runway, and she could watch the small planes take off. They had not yet reached the cafe. Vanessa's car was there. He noticed it the same moment she noticed him. She had been parked near the entrance, talking on her phone, and she lowered it slowly as they came into her line of sight. Rachel Holt was in the passenger seat. They had apparently had the same idea about the airfield cafe. Or they had stopped for some other reason. Or the universe had a particular preference for irony today. Vanessa stepped out of the car. She was dressed as she always was after court, the structured blazer, the confident heels, the expression of someone who has recently prevailed. Rachel stayed inside, watching through the windshield. "Ethan," Vanessa said. Not warmly. Observationally. "Vanessa." Lily's hand tightened in his. "I was going to call," Vanessa said, "about the visitation schedule. I think we should review the weekend arrangement before." His phone rang. He glanced at it. Marcus, his chief pilot. "Excuse me a moment." He stepped a few feet to the side and answered. "Mr. Carter, we're certified and ready to taxi. Whenever you give the word." 10 minutes, Ethan said. "We're in the parking lot." He hung up. Vanessa had heard. She was looking at him with the particular expression of someone who has heard something that does not compute. "We?" she said. He looked at Lily. "You want to see a plane up close?" Her eyes went wide. "Our plane?" "Our plane." And then, before Vanessa could speak, before Rachel could lower the car window, before anything else could happen, the sound arrived. It was the engines. The Gulfstream G550 had been positioned at the far end of the private aviation terminal. It was not, by aviation standards, a large aircraft, but it was unmistakable. Long and white and precise, with the quiet authority of a machine built to a standard that required no announcement. It rolled slowly from the hangar with the kind of unhurried confidence that very few things possess. On its tail, a stylized logo. The letters C and W, for Carter and Wolf, rendered in dark blue against white. The aircraft stopped on the taxiway 50 yards from where they stood. Marcus descended the air stairs in full uniform dark jacket. The 4-stripe epaulets that Ethan had always told him were excessive for a private operation, and the relaxed bearing of a man who has flown this route 1,000 times and finds it genuinely pleasurable. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." He nodded at Lily. "Miss Carter, ready for your first flight on the new aircraft?" Lily looked at the plane. She looked at her father. "Is that ours?" she whispered. "Part of it," Marcus smiled. "We've got the window seat over the wing reserved, Miss Carter. Best view in the sky." 2 ground crew members in matching uniforms had emerged from the hangar and were completing the pre-departure checks with the practiced choreography of people who do this routinely. Another, a young woman in a station polo shirt with the Carter Wolf Aviation logo on the chest, approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Carter, your ground handling paperwork is ready whenever you'd like to review. Leave it with Marcus." "Of course, sir." She retreated. Ethan became aware, slowly, of the silence behind him. He turned. Vanessa stood exactly where she had been standing. Her phone was at her side. Her expression was the one he had never seen on her face before. The one that had no practiced composure behind it. No polished management of how she was perceived. It was simply open, and in its openness, it was the most honest thing he had seen from her in years. Rachel Holt had gotten out of the car. She was staring. A small group of people from the cafe, a couple with a child, an older man with binoculars had gathered near the airfield fence. Everyone was looking at the plane. Everyone was looking at Ethan. Vanessa said, very quietly, "Who are you?" He considered this. "I'm Lily's father," he said. "That's what I've been, for a while." He took his daughter's hand and walked toward the airstairs. On the plane, Lily pressed her nose to the oval window and watched the ground fall away. Ethan sat across from her with a coffee from the galley. Marcus kept a particular blend that Ethan had specified years ago and apparently maintained even through the 4 years of his absence, and watched his daughter watch the world become small. "Daddy, why didn't you tell Mommy?" He had known this question was coming. He had been composing an answer in some quiet corner of his mind since the moment Lily first learned what the company was, 2 years ago, when she had found a magazine in the waiting room of her immunologist's office, with her father's face on the cover. He had not hidden it exactly, he had simply declined to advertise it. Which was different. "Because it wasn't important," he said. She turned from the window. "But it is important. It's a big plane. The plane is a tool, like your bike." She thought about this. "My bike isn't this big." "No." He smiled. "But both of them take you somewhere." She looked back at the window. The city had contracted to a grid, neat and orderly from above, in a way that it never quite managed from the ground. "Was Mommy sad?" she asked. "I don't know. Were you sad?" He held his coffee with both hands. Outside, clouds moved slowly past the window at 32,000 feet, white and voluminous, unhurried, indifferent to the small human dramas that took place below them. "I'm not sad today," he said. "Today is Thursday." She accepted this. She returned to the window. He thought then about the early years before the company, before the marriage, before any of the things that had defined the shape his life eventually took. He had been a boy who liked to build things, not with particular genius, not with the prodigy's electric certainty that he had found his purpose. He just liked the way components became systems, the way systems became something that worked. Planes had fascinated him because they were the most audacious of engineering accomplishments. Metal, heavier than air, sustained by principle. He had never lost that. Even in the hospitals, even in the years of small apartments and modified schedules, and the particular martyrdom of invisibility, he had not lost the part of himself that understood how things worked. What he had learned, though, was something that could not be engineered. He had learned that the most important things don't announce themselves. They don't require witnesses. The night he had sat in Lily's hospital room, her third admission, the worst one, the week, the doctors had adjusted her medication so significantly that she could not keep food down and had cried from exhaustion more than pain. He had looked at his sleeping daughter and understood with absolute clarity that whatever he gave up, he would give up freely, not as sacrifice, as choice. There is a difference, though most people use the words interchangeably. Sacrifice implies reluctance. He had not been reluctant. He had been afraid, in the way any parent is afraid when their child is sick. But he had not been reluctant. He had wanted to be the person in that room. He had wanted it more than anything the glass building in Portland had been offering. Vanessa had not understood that. He had never blamed her for it. Understanding it required a particular quality of attention that she had not, through some combination of character and circumstance, developed. She was a person who measured value in outputs. Salary, title, visible achievement, the respect of people whose respect she wanted. These were not unimportant things. They simply were not the only things. She had stopped seeing him because she had always been looking for something she could measure. He had stopped being measurable on purpose, by design, and she had, quite logically by her own system, concluded he had disappeared. "Daddy." "Yeah, I'm hungry. Marcus has those crackers you like." "The cheese ones?" "The cheese ones." She disappeared toward the galley with the confident authority of a child who has decided the aircraft belongs to her, which in some technical sense it did. Ethan looked out the window. He did not feel victorious. He did not feel vindicated. He felt the way he always felt at altitude, slightly outside his ordinary self, clarified by the distance from ordinary things. He felt, specifically, grateful. He was grateful for the 7 years, for the hospital cafeterias and the pharmacy receipts and the nights of the sparrow song and the mornings of the tangled hair. He was grateful for the choice that had seemed, to everyone watching, like failure and had been, in every way that mattered, the best thing he had ever done. The magazine article ran 6 weeks later. It was not the first time Ethan had appeared in print, but it was the first time the story had been told with any biographical completeness. A writer named Christine Foley had spent 3 months piecing it together from public records, interviews with aviation industry sources, and a single conversation with Preston Wolfe, who was constitutionally incapable of not talking to journalists. The cover line read, "The billionaire who stepped away inside Carter. Wolfe Aviation's secret architect." The story was thorough. It covered the founding, the early growth, the years of Ethan's absence, the period during which Preston had managed the expansion, while Ethan maintained his stake and voted on major decisions through written proxies. It covered the Cascadia acquisition, now confirmed, which had valued Carter Wolfe at over $1 billion, and placed Ethan's personal stake, after dilution, at somewhere above $200 million. It covered, with more delicacy than Ethan had expected, the reason he had stepped back. Christine Foley had found a source at the Children's Hospital, a former nurse, who remembered a quiet man, who came every day and brought a different book each time, and who had thanked every orderly by name. The source was not quoted by name, but the image was specific enough to be unmistakable. He didn't leave the company because he failed, the article concluded. He left because he chose something that, by his own account, required his full attention. What he built in that hospital room, his daughter's stability, her recovery, her genuine happiness, is not the kind of thing that appears in a valuation report, but it may, in the end, be the more significant achievement. Vanessa read it on a Tuesday morning over coffee. She knew because Rachel called her while she was still holding the magazine. Rachel, who had been the one to send her the digital link the night before, with a string of texts that contained more explanation than information. The kind of messages you send when you know the information is going to require scaffolding. Vanessa had not needed the scaffolding. She had looked at the cover photograph, Ethan, in a white shirt, standing at the edge of a runway, one hand in his coat pocket and the other at his side, and felt something that had no clean name in her vocabulary. It was not surprise, exactly. It was the feeling of having guessed the wrong answer to a question she had not realized she was being asked. She began, quietly and methodically, to remember things she had forgotten. The watch he had sold, she had noticed it gone from his wrist one winter and asked, and he had said it wasn't something he wore anymore, and she had accepted this because she had not been paying enough attention to push further. The late-night phone calls that he took in the hallway, speaking quietly, that she had assumed were conversations with Preston about old times, the occasional formal envelopes that arrived and that he opened and read and filed without comment. She had attributed none of these things to wealth because she had decided, somewhere along the line, that Ethan was a person without it. She had decided this not from evidence, but from the accumulated weight of her own assumptions, and those assumptions, she understood now, had been built on a premise that she had confused for observation. She had looked at a man who drove a 10-year-old car and bought his daughter's school clothes at the regular store and packed his own lunch and assumed she knew what he was. She had been wrong. What she had taken for limitation was preference. What she had called failure was choice. She sat with the magazine for a long time. Rachel texted again. She didn't reply. She was thinking about the night 3 years ago when Lily had come home from the hospital for the last extended stay, and Ethan had made soup, actual soup from scratch, because Lily's stomach was still sensitive and she could only manage certain textures. Vanessa had come home late from a work dinner and found the two of them asleep on the couch, the soup on the stove still warm, the TV showing a nature documentary about migratory birds. She had taken a photograph on her phone. She still had it somewhere. She had stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and felt, very briefly, the vertigo of being on the outside of something complete. She had closed the feeling away because she hadn't known what to do with it. She understood now that the feeling had been recognition, and that she had refused to acknowledge it because it would have required changing too many things about the story she was telling herself about her life. The weeks after the article were strange, not for Ethan, who had always occupied the same altitude regardless of what was written about him, and who spent most of the period in a series of board meetings in Portland that he attended via a combination of video and occasional physical presence, while Lily was at school and their routine continued in its established grooves. Is strange for Vanessa. The shift was subtle at first. A meeting where a colleague's deference to her was slightly less than before, not disrespect, but something recalibrated. An overheard conversation in the elevator where her name was mentioned alongside the word, apparently in a tone that suggested surprise. The particular embarrassment of being the last to know something that everyone else had recently discovered. Her friend group had been a comfort during the divorce. They had performed the requisite solidarity, the dinners, the sympathetic listening, the gentle suggestions that she was better off, that Ethan had never really matched her ambition, that she deserved someone who could keep up. This had been gratifying at the time, in the way that performances of agreement always are. Now the same group was quieter. Not cold, just calibrated differently. The way people recalibrate when new information arrives, and the previous consensus turns out to have been incomplete. Derek, the man she had begun seeing 3 months after the filing, had a different response. He had seen the magazine article and called her that evening with a level of interest that had not been present in previous conversations, and the change in his attention, its sudden warmth, its specific inquiries about her relationship with Ethan's attorneys, about the terms of the settlement, had been clarifying in a way she had not anticipated. She had ended the call with a polite excuse. She had sat afterward in the kitchen of the house, that was now entirely hers, and felt the specific loneliness of a space that has more room than it needs. She thought about Lily. This was where the feelings became most acute, most unmanageable, most honest. She loved her daughter. She had not lost this. Had never lost it. Even in the worst of the years when she had been most absent, she had simply outsourced the love's expression to Ethan, and had told herself this was reasonable because he was the one at home, and someone had to work, and the division of responsibilities was what it was. She had not examined what it was. She began, reluctantly, to examine it. She remembered Lily's 3rd birthday party, the one Ethan had organized entirely himself, because Vanessa had been traveling for a conference that she had justified as unmovable. She remembered Lily describing it to her on the phone. The cake was in the shape of a rabbit. Daddy had made it from a kit. It was a little lopsided, but she'd loved it. Vanessa had laughed and said that sounded like your father. She had meant it as a gentle joke about his engineering precision applied impractically to baking. She understood now that Lily had not registered it as a joke. She understood that she had missed the party, and that Ethan had made a lopsided rabbit cake, and that Lily had kept the photograph of it for 2 years in a small box under her bed, and that Vanessa only knew this because Ethan had mentioned it once, without emphasis, during a conversation about what Lily kept in her room. He had mentioned it without emphasis. He hadn't been making a point. He had simply been describing their daughter's life, which he knew in the specific, granular, unperformative way that only comes from being present. She had not been present. She had been working. She sat in her kitchen for a long time. Then she cried. She called Ethan on a Thursday. He answered on the 3rd ring. She could hear, in the background, the particular domestic quiet of his apartment. No television, no music, just the ambient sounds of an interior space that had been organized around the rhythms of a child. Vanessa, I was wondering if we could meet, she said. Not about the visitation schedule. Just meet. There was a pause. Not an unfriendly one. Just the natural pause of a person deciding. Sure, he said. There's a coffee place on Morrison. Lily's at her piano class on Saturday from 10 to 11. That works. She was there first. She ordered something and sat at a corner table that faced the door. The way she always sat in unfamiliar spaces, back covered, clear line of sight, the old habit of managing her environment. He arrived exactly at 10. He was wearing the kind of clothes he always wore. Jeans, a dark Henley, the coat that had seen considerable use. He had not dressed up. She was not sure whether this was a statement or just him. It was just him. He ordered coffee at the counter and came to the table and sat across from her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I read the article," she said. "I know. I didn't know," she said. "About the company. About any of it." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "I know you didn't. Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her, not with anger. She had been braced for anger, had expected it, had rehearsed several responses to it on the drive over. He looked at her with the same expression she had seen on him in the courtroom, which was something close to patience. "I thought about telling you," he said, "early on. But then it just wasn't what we talked about. And then it had been so long. And you had such a clear idea of who I was." That he stopped. The conversation felt like it would have been about proving something, and I didn't want to prove anything. I just wanted to get through the hard years. "You were proud," she said. "Probably. Yes. Stubborn. Also, yes." She looked at her coffee. "I said some things. In the courtroom." "I wasn't. You didn't say them in the courtroom." She stopped. "Rachel said them," he said. "You said them at the house. Over the years, the courtroom was just a formality." This was true. This was more precisely true than she had wanted it to be. "I stopped seeing you," she said. It came out before she had decided to say it. "You were right. What you said outside. I stopped seeing you long before." "Yeah, that wasn't fair." He nodded. "Not in agreement, exactly. In acknowledgement, which is different. Did you ever—" She started, then stopped. "Did I ever what?" "Still love me?" Near the end. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the coffee shop, a bus went by and its light moved across the window and across his face and past. "I think I loved the idea of what we were going to be," he said. "I held on to that for a long time. Longer than I should have, probably. And then Lily got sick, and he looked at the window, and there wasn't room for both things. The idea I was holding on to, and the thing I actually had to do, so I let the idea go." She looked at her hands on the table. Her hands were the only part of her that had ever looked like her mother's, the same wide knuckles. The same way they stilled when she was trying not to feel something. "She told me you never said anything bad about me," Vanessa said. "Lily did. She said you never." She pressed her lips together. "That means you did it right. Even when I didn't. She told me you never said." "Lily doesn't need to know the complicated parts," he said. "She needs to know both of her parents are people she can love. That's—" She shook her head. "That's incredibly generous of you." "It's not generous. It's just practical. She's going to be okay, you know. Lily. She's going to be really okay." He said it with the certainty of someone who has been watching for years and has arrived at a conclusion based on evidence. She believed him. In the months that followed, they became slowly, imperfectly, through a series of awkward handoffs and miscommunicated schedules, and one genuinely difficult phone call about Lily's medication, refill something like competent co-parents. It was not graceful. It was the way most real things are. Characterized by good intentions and repeated small failures and the gradual accumulation of working arrangements that nobody would have designed from scratch but that function, mostly, with the commitment of the people involved. Ethan returned to a more active role at Carter Wolf. Not the all-consuming role of the founding years. He had structured his involvement carefully, with boundaries that protected his mornings with Lily, her school pickups, her recital rehearsals, the Tuesday night dinners where they made pasta from scratch, and she wore an apron printed with cartoon tomatoes that had been a birthday gift from her grandmother. He had hired a part-time assistant, a brisk, organized woman named Sandra Briggs, who managed his schedule with the efficiency of someone who had been briefed on what mattered most, and genuinely accepted this, and returned to his seat on the board and his role in the Cascadia integration. Preston, who had spent 4 years telling interviewers that the company's success was a team effort without being specific about the composition of the team, was visibly relieved to have Ethan present again. Not because he had been struggling, he hadn't, but because there is a particular quality of thinking that Ethan brought to problems that Preston, who was brilliant in different ways, found genuinely useful. They had always worked well together, which was rarer than the business literature about partnerships generally acknowledged. The work was good. It was good in the way that Ethan had forgotten work could be, when it was connected to something he actually wanted to build, but it did not replace what he had built with Lily. That was the lesson, if there was one to name. That the two things, the professional self and the parental self, were not in competition. He had made them compete by removing himself entirely from one of them. And he understood now that the removal had been necessary for a particular period and that the period was over. He could hold both things. Most people could, with enough structure and honesty about what they were doing. Vanessa, for her part, made changes that surprised him. She declined a promotion that would have required 70% travel. He heard about it from Lily, who reported it with the pleased bewilderment of someone who has been given something they wanted without asking. Vanessa didn't explain it to him directly, which was fine. She didn't owe him explanations, but he noted it. She attended the next 3 medical appointments with their immunologist, which had previously been his domain entirely. She was good in them, asked sharp questions, took notes, engaged with the doctor as an equal rather than deferring, which Lily's doctor had told Ethan privately that she appreciated. She called Lily every evening at 8 o'clock when Lily was not with her. The calls were short 10 minutes, sometimes 15, but they were consistent. Lily began to speak of them as an established part of her day. Ethan noticed all of this without comment. He had stopped needing her to be different than she was. This was the transformation, if there was one. Not that she became someone new, but that he stopped requiring her to. The anger which had been quiet and contained, but which had existed, because he was a person and not a parable, had worked its way through his system in the way emotions do when you don't suppress them and don't amplify them, just acknowledge them and let them do their predictable work. What remained was something moderate and functional. Not warmth, exactly. Not friendship, yet, but the shared project of a child who was thriving, and the mutual recognition that they were both better at it now than they had been at the end of the marriage. He thought sometimes about what Lily had said on the plane. Why didn't you tell Mommy? He still wasn't sure he had answered it fully. The honest answer, the one he had been circling around for months, was that he had not told Vanessa because he had wanted, badly and perhaps foolishly, to be seen without the money. He had wanted to matter in the way that quiet, ordinary people mattered. For their presence, their consistency, the daily texture of their love. He had wanted this so much that he had made an error in the other direction. He had withheld information that wasn't his to withhold, and he had let his pride dress itself up as humility. He was working on the pride. This was not easy work. Pride of this particular variety, the inverted kind. The kind that disguises itself as indifference to status, is among the more tenacious of human qualities, because it provides its host with the comfortable feeling of having transcended something while actually remaining inside it. Ethan had believed, for years, that he didn't care what people thought of him. He had been partially right. He didn't care what strangers thought. But he had cared. Very specifically, what Vanessa thought, and he had responded to her contempt, not by correcting it but by cultivating it, allowing it to grow unchallenged because some part of him had found a grim satisfaction in being misunderstood. That was not virtue. It was armor, wearing the costume of virtue. He acknowledged this without excessive self-flagellation, which was another thing he had learned in the hospital years. That self-examination and useless counterproductive, even when it becomes its own kind of performance. You looked at the thing clearly, you understood it. And then you turned to face whatever came next. What came next was Lily's piano class, her recital, her Tuesday pasta nights, her increasingly confident sparrow song, her habit of asking one sharp question per day that he was not always able to answer. He taught her this, that you could be wrong about something without being a bad person, and that being a bad person was much harder than most stories suggested, that most people, given the chance and the right circumstances, were trying. She listened to this with the slightly skeptical expression of a child who has not yet had enough experience to fully credit it. That was fine. She would. The recital was on a Friday night in November. The school gymnasium had been transformed by the efforts of 14 sets of parents and 3 teachers. Folding chairs in rows, a low stage with a blue velvet curtain, paper stars strung from the ceiling lights, a table by the door with punch, and the kind of cookies that always appear at these events, iced in the school colors. Ethan arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes early. He was wearing the same pale blue shirt. He had ironed it again. For the same reason. He found a seat on the aisle, 4 rows from the front. He had Lily's jacket over his arm. She always got cold after performing, a detail he had learned through repetition and now anticipated automatically. At 6:50, Vanessa arrived. She stood in the gymnasium doorway for a moment, scanning the rows. She was also early, which he noticed with mild surprise. She had historically been punctual to the minute rather than before it. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, and her hair was down rather than in the constructed uprightness of her work self. She saw him, a pause. Then she walked over and sat after a half-second of decision in the seat beside him. They did not speak immediately. The gymnasium filled around them. Other parents settled into rows, found their children's spots in the program, compared notes on who had been practicing and who hadn't. She was nervous this morning, Ethan said. She texted me, Vanessa said. I told her nerves meant she cared. That's good advice. You gave it to me, years ago. Before a presentation. He didn't remember this. I didn't know I was keeping a record, she added, with a wryness that was new or perhaps old. Something from before the years had hardened. Neither did I, he said. The lights dimmed. The children filed out from the side door in 2 rows, wearing the gold-starred costumes that had consumed considerable parental energy, and one memorable Saturday afternoon in the school hallway with fabric glue. Lily was 5th from the left. She was looking at the audience with the wide, scanning attention of someone not yet sure where to fix their gaze. Then she found them, both of them, side by side in the aisle seats. Her face did something private and important. An emotion that moved across it too quickly to name, but that Ethan had seen before in different registers. Relief, he thought. Or something close to it. She squared her shoulders. She faced forward. The program began. Ethan had seen many of these events. He had the practiced neutrality of a parent who has learned to distribute his attention evenly, rather than telegraphing anxiety that could reach across a room and land on a child. He watched the other performers with genuine attention, the boy who forgot his lines and recovered without apparent distress. The pair of girls who harmonized on something sweetly off-pitch, the youngest child who stood at the microphone and simply stared, apparently having decided that performing was not for her. Then Lily's group. She stepped forward with 3 others. The piano played the introduction 4 bars. A simple figure in a major key that Ethan had heard so many times it was now embedded in his memory alongside other permanent things. And she sang. It was 3 lines about a sparrow that had flown too far south and found its way back by following the warmth. The metaphor was not subtle, it was a children's song and was not required to be subtle. But Lily sang it with the specific quality of a child who has practiced something so many times it has become genuinely hers rather than someone else's composition she is reproducing. Her voice carried. Mrs. Ellison had been right. When the song ended, the applause was the general communal kind, that these events produce warm, inclusive, not discriminating among performances. But Ethan clapped specifically, with a gratitude that had nothing to do with the performance and everything to do with the performer. Beside him, he heard Vanessa exhale. He glanced at her. She was not crying. Exactly. She had the look of someone who has been close to tears for a while and has not decided what to do about it. She's wonderful, Vanessa said. She is. She got that from you. The Vanessa paused. The way she just goes ahead, even when she's scared. He didn't respond to this, not because it wasn't kind, it was. But because what he was feeling in that moment was not about himself. And he didn't want to redirect it. After the program, they waited while the children were released from backstage. Lily emerged at a run, in the way children do when they have successfully accomplished something and require immediate audience for their success. She ran to them both, not to one and then the other, but to the space between them, so that her hug was somehow simultaneous. He felt, beside him, Vanessa's arm come around Lily's shoulder. He felt his own arm do the same from the other side. Lily, in the middle, said into the space between them, "I didn't mess up the sparrow part." "We know," Ethan said. "We heard," Vanessa said. "Was it good?" "It was the best sparrow we've ever heard," Ethan said. Which was both objectively true and meaningfully true, in the way that the best things usually manage to be. Lily considered this verdict satisfactory. She pulled back and looked at them, both the bright, assessing gaze of a child who misses less than adults' hope. "You're both here," she said. "We're both here," Ethan said. She accepted this with the quiet decisiveness of someone who has just received confirmation of a hypothesis she had been testing. "Okay," she said. "Can we get cookies?" "The ones at the table are probably the vanilla ones. I like vanilla." They went to get cookies. The paper stars turned slowly overhead in the ventilation from the open gym doors. Other families gathered and separated and regathered in the pleasant noise of collective celebration. Somewhere near the back, Mrs. Ellison was receiving compliments with the restrained satisfaction of a teacher who has survived another recital intact. Ethan stood beside his daughter at the cookie table, watching her deliberate between two options, with the full gravity she brought to small decisions. He was not thinking about the company, or the courtroom parking structure, or the woman who had laughed with her friend while his back was turned. He was not thinking about private jets, or board meetings, or the magazine cover, or any of the things that the world had decided recently were the measure of him. He was thinking about the sparrow song, about the way Lily had squared her shoulders and faced forward, about how nobody had taught her that she had come to it herself, from whatever combination of inheritance and experience and the accumulated effect of being loved reliably in a world that is not always reliable. He was thinking about how the small, unglamorous hours had made her the hospital afternoons, the kitchen mornings, the bedtimes that had required patience he had not known he possessed until he found he did. He was thinking about all the things that don't appear in valuation reports, or courtroom testimony, or business magazine covers. The bear who couldn't find his hat, the lopsided rabbit birthday cake, the cheese crackers in the galley of a jet that a 7-year-old had decided was hers, the way she pressed her nose to the oval window and watched the world become beautiful from above. You could not put a number on any of it. He was thinking that exactly this, was what he had stayed for, and it had been more than enough.